2016 felt like a very different race because there was not that same hesitancy about talking about corruption.
Because he didn't like Hillary, because Bernie didn't like Hillary. So, yeah, but this does get into the bigger questions about Bernie's campaign. I remember when Zephyr Teachow wrote an article, and the article was like, look, this is just the facts. Joe Biden's corrupt. Here it is laid out for you. And Bernie behind the scenes was mad at Zephyr Teachow for that. And, I know...
First of all, that's accurate, right? That he was upset about it.
Yeah, well,
he was publicly mad about it. It wasn't even just private.
Yeah, that's true.
When that happened, I actually was doing a hit on MSNBC, like at the time the article came out, and was asked about it. And so from my perspective, I got a call immediately from the comms director, like apologizing, and he was obviously very upset. And, I think the reality is that article was approved. She didn't step out of line. That article was approved by the comms department.
Right.
And I think that she was kind of unfairly thrown under the bus for it. She wasn't stepping out of line.
She wasn't freelancing.
And so I think internal miscommunications ended up falling on her quite unfairly.
She was
some
the scapegoat.
Other people who were also involved in the process unfairly took that hit. But more substantively, I think she was right. And that was exactly the kind of messaging that I think would have given Bernie a much better chance to win.
So it's that, correct. I agree with you. But then also the other giant failure, and I think the numbers really bear this out, is that he didn't make the case. We just ran this experiment in 2016. You guys said the centrist was more electable. She was not more electable. She lost. Joe is exactly like Hillary ideologically.
Hillary 2.0.
I am the most electable. Only I, Bernie Sanders, can beat Donald Trump. Now, we know in retrospect that's not true. Biden did end up beating Donald Trump. But at the time, that's the argument you had to make in order to move the poll.
Pandemic and mass mismanagement.
Because all the polls showed, on the actual issues, everybody was with Bernie. It was overwhelming, but the one area where Biden was absolutely obliterating Bernie was this issue of electability, and he didn't push back on that.
I'd agree. I also think that the campaign at some point started trying to reach discrete demographic groups that they felt like they had to win on the basis of appealing to what they thought that those demographic groups wanted, as opposed to realizing that, Black Americans' number one concern was electability also. And then instead of trying hard to, pitch this ad using some South Carolina elected woman, that stuff is fine, but really they just want to know that you can beat Trump.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Talk a little bit more. You called it the Black Misleadership class.
Yeah.
What do you see as the roots of that dynamic?
What's interesting is one of our guests, Pascal Robert, made the case that there are relationship dynamics that involve having roots in Black fraternities and sororities, having a real solid presence at HBCUs, having the phone number of local pastors, at the tip of your finger, and that those kinds of relationships are not going to be built in a campaign cycle,
right?
But they're really formative to being able to get the kind of grassroots support in the community that someone like Biden is able to lock down seemingly through osmosis.
Yeah.
And that, I think historically, my own kind of take, I guess, would be that historically identity has been a fairly decent proxy for Black interests in America, if only because the bar was so low in terms of what we were actually advocating for. There was so far for us to go in terms of what we were making, what the kind of political demands we were making. So, especially through the 50s and 60s, you had genuinely committed activists who were making wins, who were winning real gains for the community. And a lot of those people who came into office at that point are still the people who we're with. We're still dealing with people whose claim to fame is, being there at Edmund Pettus Bridge or, having, got the Dickens kicked out of them in some civil rights context. So, there's a reason that trust is there. And I think it's, especially for the white left, not necessarily wise to make direct attacks without being able to acknowledge the service that some of those folks have done.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, when someone becomes as corrosive a presence as Jim Clyburn has become, you have to be willing to bring the heat. And I think that's where it's really important to have surrogates who can deliver a message, to find people who similarly have investment at the community. Jesse Jackson endorsed Bernie Sanders, but it was very, very late in the game. And I can imagine a world where he came out swinging early and offered a real visible counterpoint to the narrative that look at all these black figureheads that love Biden and Biden must be the guy, we know Joe, all of this stuff. Like Jesse Jackson going on TV after Clyburn says we know Joe, saying, I know Joe and what I know isn't great.
Yeah.
Let me run down the list.
Right.
Jesse Jackson's a little bit of a dicey figure in the black community as well. So, but it would have helped. Someone like
Harry Belafonte.
Harry Belafonte.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, Harry Belafonte I hear that
he's a legend.
Was just not doing. Right. He was just ailing, and that's the reason he didn't come out. But there have to be more than just like this handful of people that you can deploy in this way. Also, outside of that context, Bernie had more great surrogates than anybody in America. Yeah. I think Ariana Grande, I think, is the number one, has more Twitter followers than not Twitter, Instagram followers than almost anybody in America, in the world. Mm-hmm. Maybe I think that's the case.
I'd believe that.
Like Cardi B. I mean, you have these people who could be posting once a week. Bernie Sanders is going to cancel your student debt. Are you registered yet?
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders is going to.
He did win that demographic, though, overwhelmingly. You know what I mean? Like the young demographic. They didn't turn out enough. They didn't turn out enough. That's true. But also, you could argue he should have been able to reach other demographics that he didn't reach.
I'd agree. And to ask those people to talk to their parents more, because that was part of the story of the Latino vote, right? Part of the story of the Latino vote is that historically, older Latino voters tend to rely on guidance from their kids more because of language barrier issues and cultural factors and things like that. So you have young Latino voters liking Bernie, going home, explaining it, and then having wonderful wins like we had in Nevada. Or less heralded, but I think equally important, the overwhelming response we got from non-white voters in Iowa. It's only 10% non-white, but like 99% of them voted for Bernie. And that was awesome. And that was the consequence of a lot of real grassroots
And the DNC and Pete Buttigieg came in and be like, we're not going to count those ones. How about we just not count these satellite caucuses with all the immigrant voters who voted overwhelmingly for Bernie? That was amazing. That was really something.
And had people, I will never get over Soledad O'Brien saying after Nevada that we have to wait until an actually diverse state votes to figure out what the people want. She's Afro-Latina and dismissing Nevada and all of those voters like that.
So here's another thought I had where I really think Bernie, sort of messed up in the campaign is that I would have defined all of these policy positions that he advocates for. I would have called that moderate. I'd have been like, I'm the moderate. Joe's the one who's extreme. He's the one who voted for the Iraq War. He's the one who voted for the Patriot Act. He's the one who outsourced your jobs. He's the one who did the crime bill. He's the one who did the bankruptcy bill. I'm the one that has the moderate positions. Do you think that an argument like that would have potentially resonated more?
Yes, but especially because regardless of the moderate part, the willingness to tee up all of Joe Biden's transgressions the way that you just did, I think is enormously powerful and was never done. And the closest that he came was that last Ides of March debate. The debate after which we all went home and quarantine happened and it was the pall fell on America. But it was still Joe Biden's my friend ultimately. He can win. He would be a good president.
That drove me crazy. And, he can win.
Oh, that was talking
Bernie,
to you
what are you doing?
Like, it's over.
I think he can win, but please pick me.
It's difficult because I was having a debate with a more centrist friend of mine recently, and they were asking me, they were like, why do you hate Joe Biden so much? And I was like, well, it's not personal. I don't hate Joe Biden, but let me ask you this. Do you expect me to have affinity for the guy who was the architect of the crime bill? Like, I'm like really asking you.
Right.
You know how much student debt I have. Do you think that I should be, sanguine about the guy who made it so that I can't discharge this in bankruptcy? Like, how many very specific things? Like, I'm not fun at parties. I admit it. But I was like, don't come at me over my mild critique of Joe Biden when I have every right to be furiously hateful of the man. But I don't think that's useful to me to take my energy there. But if he were correctly portrayed, if he were accurately described, he should be considered a not great person. For a lot of Americans whose lives he's directly impacted, mass incarcerated, thrown into bankruptcy, and ruin.